All right, so I'm delighted to talk to these friends for our Rethink Education panel. I want to start today's conversation with a startlingly simple statement. The entire purpose of our K-12 education system is to prepare young people for life. It should be sort of a no-duh kind of thing, but is it the question that we actually measure all our decisions about? So like when we're talking about school funding, are these conversations driven by how best are we preparing kids for life? When we talk about rules and regulations and the limitations we place on teachers in the classroom and testing protocol, are all of those decisions driven by this question of are we preparing kids for life? When we talk about that, the vision ought to be how do we create lifelong learners who are equipped to take on the world? So, as we talk about that question, I could think of no better people to have this conversation with than Donald Nielsen, Andrew Clark, and Elyse Marcellino. 3 out-of-the-box thinkers with a deep commitment to improving education for all kids. So let me tell you real quick about our panelists. First of all, Elyse Marcellino received her bachelor's degree from Belhaven University, a master's in education policy from Harvard University, not quite Belhaven, but a good school nonetheless. Did a tour of duty on Capitol Hill working for Senator Thad Cochran, and helped to launch a charter school in Atlanta where she served as a classroom teacher. At Empower these last 4 years, she is now working on an exciting new project I hope she's going to tell you about in a minute. Donald Nielsen did his undergraduate work at the University of Washington, received an MBA from the Harvard Business School, and had a distinguished career in business where he co-founded the Hazelton Corporation, the world's largest contract biological and chemical research and testing company. Sounds really complicated. In 1992, Donald retired from Hazelton and has spent the last 3 decades focused on improving public education. He was elected to the Seattle Public Schools Board, where he oversaw a significant transformation in the district, and has since written a book called Every School: One Citizen's Guide to Transforming Education. I've distributed a number of your books to legislators.
Thank you.
And Andrew Clark is a veteran of the Stand Together community, a philanthropic organization founded by Charles Koch to address some of the most pressing issues facing our nation. He's a skilled lobbyist and political tactician. Andrew has worked to unite broad and diverse coalitions to transform policy, ranging from food trucks to social security. Most recently, Andrew helped found and now serves as the executive director of Yes Every Kid, which works to change the nation's education system from its current standardized approach to one grounded in serving the unique needs of every student. Please help me welcome our panelists. Andrew, talk to us about why you started Yes Every Kid and your vision for the work you're doing.
Well, I think the vision is exactly what you nailed, which is we've created an education system that's incredibly standardized, right? It's built on this industrial model assumption that we're going to treat every kid the same way. We're going to organize them by the year they were born. We're going to teach them the same thing at the same time, and we're going to cram information into their head, and they're going to love it, and that's going to make them functional adults. It's the wrong system. It's also the wrong moral value system, right? Anybody in here who has kids knows every kid's unique. Every kid's different. They have different interests, different aptitudes. They learn at different times. They learn in different ways. You can't have a system that's the same and then wonder why people come out different. Industrialization works great for widgets. People aren't widgets. We shouldn't treat them like that. So to answer your question, I got involved in this. I'm originally from Arizona. We were out there having a big fight around education savings accounts, which you might be familiar of. It was the first time I'd been involved in education policy in those battles, and I was shocked at the level of discourse. It was basically 2 sides arguing who get to cram knowledge into kids better and which type of knowledge they got to cram into there. And I just thought, that can't be the purpose. Like, how is this the debate? The debate is we want the same thing, only different? It's the wrong debate. There needs to be a new voice, a new vision, a new discussion in there. And that's why we created Yes Every Kid, was to try to breathe a new vision into the conversation.
That's good. I want to come back to some of that. Donald, you have been at the forefront of this conversation about transforming education for, as I said, 3 decades. At Discovery Institute, you chair the American Center for Transforming Education, and you've written a book by that title. So why do you think it's important that we transform education, and how would Mississippi fit into that effort?
Great question. Well, at the Discovery Institute, we are engaged in what we hope will be the transformation of the public school system in the United States. And the reason we're doing it is because the public school system of the United States is obsolete. It is not broken, it is obsolete. And the reason I say it's obsolete is because it is operating exactly the way it was set up to operate. It was designed to create children who had the capacity to work in the forthcoming Industrial Revolution factories. And a few of the children were supposed to go on to higher education so they could be the managers of those factories. And that was how this whole thing started. And it started in 1904. In 1904, virtually every aspect of today's public school system was established. The 6-hour day, the 180-day year, the curriculum for high school, 4 years of English, 3 years of math, 3 years of history, the credit as a standard of course completion. All of that was established 117 years ago, and it is still in place in not only Mississippi, but in every state in the United States. It's obsolete. And here in Mississippi, well, what has happened in our society is the United States after World War II was one of the highest educated populations in the world. Today, we rank 26th in the world. Now, our schools have not declined. Quite frankly, they haven't changed. We are at the same level of academic achievement as we were in 1970. What has happened in the rest of the world is they have changed and gotten better, and we're now 26. Here in Mississippi, we're number 43 in college readiness. We're number 49 we're number 43 in educational achievement. We're number 49 in college readiness, and we have the highest poverty level in the United States. Now, it's obvious that the United States is losing ground globally, and Mississippi is at the bottom of the United States. Now, granted, there's some good things going on in Mississippi. Places like Corinth, Vicksburg, and Gulfport. There's some other districts that are doing some really good stuff. But you have 140 districts. We have 140 districts or more in this state, and all of them need to improve. And if they don't improve, the state of Mississippi is going to see limited opportunities for your children, limited employment, and increasing poverty. That's the nature of the beast going forward. And it's not about money. We have tried to spend more money on schools over the years, and it hasn't worked. Today, as a nation, we spend 2.5 times more money per child in inflation-adjusted dollars than we did in 1970. 2.5 times. The adult employment in our education system has increased at 4 times the rate of student enrollment. We now have an $800 billion enterprise with 6 million employees. And our academic achievement has not materially improved. So if we want to be serious about this, we have to change things. So then the question becomes, how do you change it? And when I ran for the school board, I thought the entity of change was the urban district. And what I've subsequently learned is it's not the urban district. We changed Seattle Public Schools, but it has reverted back to exactly what it was. In fact, Seattle Public Schools may be worse today than they were in 1993. I don't know. I don't pay any attention anymore to them. The entity of change is not the district, it's not the school, and it's not the federal government. It's the state. If we want to fundamentally change our public education system, we have to do it at the state level. And the reason we have to do it at the state level is because the state controls most of the money. They decide who's allowed to teach, who's allowed to lead. They control curriculum, they control testing, and they control graduation requirements. So if we want to fix our schools, we have to fix our state. And the way we do that is we'll have to pass either waivers to the existing state codes and laws, or we have to change the laws and the codes. Those are our options. And if we're serious about doing this, then we have to get on with the battle immediately. And it's my belief, and the reason Discovery Institute is in Mississippi, is because we believe the state of Mississippi has the greatest need and, quite frankly, has the capacity to do this. I believe that Mississippi has the opportunity to lead this country in the transformation of its public school system. And if it does that, it'll be the greatest economic development program you could initiate. And it will set the template for the nation. So that's why we're here.
Good. Elyse, you've been in education your entire career, from both the public policy side and in the classroom. So would you share with us what you're doing now around new schools and why this moment is the right moment in Mississippi for this new project?
Sure, I'll give you all a little background first. So the first time I walked into a brand new school was as a classroom teacher, and it was in Atlanta. I was on the founding team of a charter school there. I gained a deep appreciation for the work it takes to start a school and scale it up there. But probably the most impactful experience was meeting lots of families who for the first time were walking into a setting they had chosen, coming from one they were not satisfied with, walking into a school that they were increasingly buying into. And I found that even though they came from very different backgrounds and were in very different circumstances, they wanted some pretty straightforward things. They wanted a safe environment. They wanted a school that prized truth and knowledge, curiosity and character. They wanted their students to be treated like whole human beings, not just a test score, and to be prepared for life. It was also in that school that I saw what great leaders coming together with passionate teachers could do when they had high expectations for all students, gave them the support they needed to succeed, and invited families into that process. I just spoke with a student of mine, a former student of mine who graduated this year from that school, and she and her mother are over the moon about the bright future she has, in part because of a great education. And I am moved by the heartbreaking alternative that so many of us have seen too many times, which is students unhappy in schools, families desperate to make a change but not sure how to. And in that case, they need a lot more information. And so we did a statewide survey and asked Mississippians, is there anything going on in K-12 education that concerns you? And came back with an answer that was 50% of Mississippians, which is pretty astounding, saying they believe that K-12 education is on the wrong track. There's a sense that something is off. We also asked them if they agreed about the purpose of education, and astoundingly again, the vast majority of them agreed on an idealistic definition of what education is there to do. And I'm going to read it to you. Mississippians believe that the purpose of education is to develop students' minds and characters, foster in them a lifelong love of learning, and equip them with the knowledge and skills to find success and lead meaningful lives. So with that ideal in mind, Empower over the past couple of years has been working on some resources to empower stakeholders to make the best decisions they possibly can. And then I want to tell you about the New Schools Project, which is about growing the education options available to people. So a quick plug for the Mississippi School Finder. If you haven't looked at that website, it's an online mapping tool for parents to go and see what are the school options around them, to gain relevant information about those options, and to understand that options even exist in the education space. We're in the process of expanding that so that they have even more information that they need, and to make it a useful tool for education entrepreneurs and policymakers who want to look at the entire state landscape and say, where are the greatest successes and where are the greatest needs, and how can we address this on a statewide level? The New Schools Project, which is what I'm working on now, is really about growing the education options available. Something we saw during COVID was a surge in interest in people having more education options. And I think it's an interest that just became more explicit with the emergency that COVID was for many families who were trying to understand how to help their students who were now out of school and needed to continue to learn. That is a sense of urgency that I don't believe is going away. And so that's only accelerated our interest in starting this New Schools Project, which we're in the early stages of, the goal of which is to provide a guide, partner, and resources to school leaders and communities who want to start new schools to serve. Mississippians. And so the idea there, again, is to give people the information they need to make the best possible decisions and to grow the education options that exist so that every student has the opportunity they need in Mississippi.
It's good. So, Donald, I want to come back to you and ask about this critical relationship between students and a teacher. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in Mississippi, as we talk to teachers across the state, more so than ever, I hear teachers voice tremendous frustration. Even while the data shows students are doing better in Mississippi in recent years, teachers are more frustrated and they're leaving the profession in droves. And they feel like they're functionaries. They feel like most of their day revolves around bureaucratic paperwork and red tape and just preparing kids for tests. A lot of that's coming from Jackson or Washington. So accountability matters, but how do we strike the right balance between top-down accountability and local control and giving teachers the freedom to meet the needs of their student in the classroom? Donald, I'll start there and we'll go to Andrew.
Well, it's a very good question. First of all, I would say there is no accountability built into our K-12 system. Sounds like a profound statement, but it's true. There's no accountability for academic achievement, and there's no accountability for the effective spending of money. When I was on the school board, I learned that public education systems don't have a management accounting system. They have a financial reporting system, and a district's responsibility is to make sure the state understands that they spent the money the state gave them exactly the way they were supposed to do it. But if you asked them what it costs to run an elementary school, they couldn't tell you because they don't keep that kind of data. And in the academic achievement, we test all the time, but nothing changes. Nobody gets fired. If you had a failing school this year, there's quite probability you'll have a failing school next year. Nobody does anything about it. And so if you're going to change things, and teachers see this, teachers see it big time, and they want to teach children. They don't want to fill out paperwork. They don't want to meet rules and regulations, and they certainly don't want to prepare them just for a test. They want them to learn. And you know, in my mind, use an analogy, testing at the end of the course is a little bit like putting the quality control inspector at the end of the line. It's too late. I mean, if you have a problem in your production line, you want to fix it at the source, not at the end, right? And so, to me, and the thing that's going on, and we saw it really vividly in the last 18 months, technology. Technology is going to allow us to understand where the child is in their learning at the moment they're there. And we'll be able to keep track of it. And children should be able to move as fast as they can go, and we should be able to assess their learning through the level of technology. We don't need end-of-course exams, we don't need state exams, and we certainly don't need federal exams. We need technology assessments ongoing, and children should move as fast as they can go.
Andrew?
Let me bifurcate between two concepts I think get merged all the time in this discussion. One is testing, which is an objectively valuable tool, and the other one is accountability, which is a desire by the legislature to make sure that money doesn't get wasted. Both valuable, when they get conflated, very destructive. So testing, let's say education's an amalgamation of products and services, right? It's math, it's science, it's food, it's a whole range of things. Let's use athletics as an easy example. If I want to become more athletic, testing is extremely valuable, right? If I want to start learning how to bench press, knowing how much weight I'm using, how many repetitions I can do, and testing myself every day gives me real-time feedback that allows me to learn and grow. The same is true in any other vertical that we want to go. Now, if I tried to standardize it, it's not very helpful at all, right? If I say, like, if everyone just does 5 wall sits every day, we're all going to get to be real good shape. That's probably not going to happen for a variety of reasons. But if I can use testing as a very effective, very smart tool, it helps me learn, grow, and develop. Separate from accountability, which is the legislature primarily and local governments asking, am I getting my money's worth? And I'll just say in there's this flawed mental model which says I can control what I mean by that. Right? I can control, accountability means I can control the outcome for students. Well, that might work if you think that the outcome is that kids are an empty vessel I can cram knowledge into. It doesn't work if you have the vision that you led with that I believe strongly, which is we want people to become whoever they want to become. If that's the premise, if that's the vision, who gets to decide whether you became who you want to become? It's not going to be your local school district. It's not going to be the state government. It's not going to be Washington, D.C. Only you know what you want to become, right? Trying to think that you can control that from some centralized place in some distant land is utter nonsense, and we ought to stop doing it. I'll give you maybe a parallel policy example I like to use. We have a cultural value with poverty that says we want to lift people out of poverty. We spend billions of dollars as a country on that. Basically, the only anti-poverty program that's ever worked to a large extent is Social Security. It's also the program in which we have the largest risk tolerance, right? I just cut you a check and hope that you spend it well in the way that works best for you. It works pretty well because people know what they need to lift themselves out of poverty. Contrast to things like food cards where we try to control every behavior. I'm going to make sure you never buy lobster because that would be, irreplete. It doesn't work. You can't control people. You can't, and you certainly can't control them from living the lives they want to lead. If you want to be successful, you actually have to trust people. So you should, as Don's saying, you should absolutely have financial controls. Make sure that we're not giving it to people for purposes that aren't meant for the intended use. Great, have all the financial controls and visibility you want, but stop trying to think you can control people into letting them live the life they want to lead. You can't do it.
Yeah.
So as a classroom teacher, Elyse, you've worked in the classroom, you've been on the other side of these bureaucratic processes and systems and the testing. What's the right balance, and how do we strike that right balance where teachers have freedom to teach, but they can't, there's also accountability for the dollars and making sure students get to where they need to get?
Yeah, it's undeniable when you talk to teachers in Mississippi that they are unhappy. They feel constrained by the number of regulations that are placed on them, and they're the ones that bear the brunt of that in the classroom every single time, and ultimately, of course, students. When I think about accountability, especially having been in a charter school where the idea is that you have freedom from some regulations so that you can have greater freedom to offer a more rigorous education, a more holistic education, and when having experienced that in a setting like the one I did in Atlanta, you see that there's great potential in pulling back on regulations that are oppressive, that are misguided, that constrain people from feeling truly free to innovate and truly free to see children as the human beings they are. Top-down accountability has really become, let me back up. Accountability has come to mean top-down accountability. I would make the argument, and I think y'all have done that very well, that it's not, you can't hold anyone accountable if the people who are closest to the problem don't have the ability to do something about it. So we've called accountability top-down accountability, federal and state laws and regulations guiding what schools do. But in reality, and this bears out in the surveys that we've done, people want more local control to provide more local solutions. I think of the District of Innovation program here in Mississippi. That is an opportunity to gain freedom from some traditional public school regulations in order to provide locally driven, innovative solutions for the community that you're serving. Now, I think you have to go a step further and you have to offer direct accountability in order to say you're even close to holding schools accountable. And what I mean by that is giving stakeholders, parents in particular, families and students, the ability to say, you're not serving me well, I'm going to go somewhere else.
So, Elyse, I'll start with you on this one, which is just sort of the next iteration of this question. A lot of this is driven by our accountability model. And, in Mississippi, a number of years ago, we changed to an A through F accountability model that certainly made it a lot more clear to parents and students whether they have a highly rated district or not. But it's so driven by testing that it's changed the school day, and it's changed the relationship between teachers and students because the model is so driven by testing. So, Elyse, I'll start with you. What does a good accountability model look like?
Yeah, well, that's a much longer conversation that needs a lot more stakeholder input. But I think a good place to start is kind of what we've been talking about. Are we actually holding schools accountable? Are there meaningful consequences when you don't serve students well? When I think about the A through F rating system, I see a lot of holes, because who are the people who need to understand if schools are serving students well? First and foremost, it's the families whose students are attending those schools. And I don't think that they're getting very much out of a single letter grade. Very often they don't understand really what that means, or they understand that really what that means is that testing is going well at the school. And I think we have to understand the limitations of measures like tests. Of course, they're a useful tool, but they tell us something, they don't tell us everything. An A through F letter rating can tell us something, it cannot tell us everything. Part of what we want to do with Mississippi School Finders, offer people relevant information. Whereas if you hand a parent a B rating for the school, that might sound pretty good. They don't know much more than that. Can we offer more information to people so that they can make even better informed decisions? I think this includes things like parent satisfaction rates in districts, talking about long-term outcomes. How are students faring after they leave the district? What are college remediation rates, college acceptance rates, employment rates? I think that these are the things that people want to know, and if we can find a way to make things like spending decisions more transparent, that's going to make the stakeholders who are making the actual decisions much more informed and engaged in the process of school.
So, yeah, Don, what would you do to the model?
Well, so many things we don't have time to go with. Let me make two comments. First comment is that, going back to Andrew's point, we have a factory model of education, and let me explain what I mean by that. I use this example a lot. We have two 5-year-old children here. This child has two parents, has lived in a loving and nurturing home since birth, has been read to since birth, speaks English, has been on a computer for 2 to 3 years. It's probably many of your children. This child over here may or may not even have one parent, has never lived anywhere you and I would consider a home, has never been read to, may not even speak English, and has never seen a computer. Now, the only thing these two children have in common is they're age 5. But under our present system, these two children could end up in the same classroom with the same teacher teaching the same course in the same way for the same length of time, and we expect the same outcome. It's insane. And we've been doing it for 100 years. It's got to stop. And the other thing I would say to you, we assess uniformly. Well, I'm sorry. We're not uniform. And let me point out this question. Every one of you in this room learned how to do a quadratic equation. Every one of you did. When was the last time you used it? I'll tell you when 90% of you last time you used it. It was your junior year in high school. And you couldn't get out of high school without learning it. But you didn't learn financial planning, financial management. You didn't learn statistics. You didn't learn civics. But you learned how to do a quadratic equation. Now, 10% of you probably needed that. But 90% of you, you don't need it to be an insurance agent. You don't need it to be a doctor. You don't need it to be a roofer. You need geometry. So my point is, what are you assessing? Are you assessing everybody to be an engineer? Does everybody need STEM? Yes, some do. You need some level of math, but you don't need quadratic equations. The last time I did it was in high school. And I've run a New York Stock Exchange company. Give me a break. We've got to change the system, and we have to change what we expect out of education of our children. Not every child needs to pass every exam at the same level with the same questions. Hello? Anyhow.
Yeah. So Andrew, what do you do with the model, the accountability model, so that we get the outcomes that you and Donald and Elyse are talking about, where kids look different? Throw it out.
Yeah.
And replace it with what?
Well, look, at a minimum, you should shift from all the standardizations that we've talked about to an individualized system that's built on mastery and attainment. So you should say, like, what's the student interested in? Well, if you were to dictate, and I don't think you should dictate foreign language as an example, but if you're going to say every kid needs to learn a foreign language, instead of telling them what foreign language they need to learn at what time, for how many hours, in which way, which Mississippi does worse than any other state in the nation. You guys are so prescriptive, it's insane. Instead of telling them everything they have to do at every minute, let them pick. If you want them to be grown-up, functional, happy, healthy adults, they're going to have to learn how to pick anyways. If you want them to become lifelong learners, they have to pick. So let them pick. And if they decide that they want to learn Arabic, or they want to learn Chinese, or they want to learn French, great. More power to them. But then let's hold a standard that says they have learned something, as opposed to they have spent hours trying to learn something, right? Let's focus it on mastery, not on effort. I will say one other thing, maybe just because some of the comments here have been so good. If you talk to the folks that are involved in the neuroscience of education, that are looking at the brain, one of the most prevalent things they talk about right now is neuroplasticity. This idea that your brain isn't static. There's no fixed amount of information that gets crammed in your skull. Instead, your brain is dynamic. It's plastic, neuroplasticity. And so it works like a muscle. Whatever you're thinking about all the time and you're doing constantly, that starts to grow, that part of the brain. You get, just like your muscles, you get more developed in that way. So if you spend all day thinking about strategies, you're going to become a very good strategic thinker. You stop doing that, you're going to start to atrophy over time. So we have an entire system that's built on this idea that people are fixed, that I'm going to learn quadratic equations and it's going to be great. Any of you still remember quadratic equations? None of you, right. Because your brain atrophied, that knowledge died off. The idea that you're going to say there's a baseline that every kid needs to learn is purely not how the brain works. You have to stop doing that. Instead, what we have to do is try to focus on kids learning how to learn, and that's what will allow them to live the life they want to live. And I'll just say one other thing, which is everybody's looking to the system to fix this, but the system's not the only thing that has to fix. Our cultural values as individuals has to change for this to work. Right now, employers ask about credentials. Some of them, the crazy few, still ask about GPAs. But we've set up this standardized system, and then we make our higher education decisions on who can attend the elite colleges of the nation on those, and then we do the same thing with employment off of all these credentials. Well, if all those credentials are crap, and 99% of them are, why are we doing that? And as a society, why do we continue to value that and want that for our children? We, as individuals, are going to have to make a shift culturally to value learning for the sake of learning, to value the people that have become lifelong learners more than the people who are credentialed. And again, it's not to say that credentials are bad or should be thrown out, but to say that our cultural morals have to evolve to the world we want to live in, or none of the systems we change will ever matter.
Yep. Along that line, I couldn't agree more, but one of the other things that has to change, and oftentimes I can't see you very well because of the lights, but I oftentimes ask people, how many of you remember a teacher that made a difference in your life? And in every room I'm in, everybody names one. And then I ask, how many can remember two? And about half the hands will go up. And then I ask, how many remember three? And about 10% of the hands go up. Now, all of us had between 35 and 40 teachers in our K-12 years. That either means that we have lousy memories or we didn't have a lot of outstanding teachers. And the reason we didn't have a lot of outstanding teachers is because the way we select and train teachers. And if we want to have schools full of dedicated, talented, truly gifted teachers, we have to fundamentally change the way we select and train teachers. And we have to fundamentally change the way we select and train leaders. And one of the things you'll find, if you walk into a truly gifted school where everybody's learning and teachers are motivated, the one thing you know unequivocally is that there's an outstanding principal running that school. Okay, but we get leadership by accident in public education, not by design. We have to change that. We have to create change agent leaders who go into our districts and into our schools and fundamentally change, and we have to free them up to be innovative entrepreneur educators. That's what we need to do, and we're not doing it anywhere, not just in Mississippi, anywhere.
So there are a few of those transformative leaders in Mississippi and in other places who have
Right.
done really innovative things
Absolutely.
that have made their districts a sought-after place where families want to move to take advantage of that educational experience. But talk about a cultural value. We talk about social justice and equality, and the fact that in 2021, in Mississippi and in a lot of places, you could have an F-rated district border an A-rated district, and for a child who grows up on this side of the street, you don't have the opportunity to attend the world-class education that's available to kids across the street because you were born on the wrong side of the street. We talk about your educational destiny being defined by your zip code. How do we create policies that if there are world-class leaders and world-class schools that parents want to take advantage of, even if we're talking, let's not even talk about public to private, even within just the public system, how do we create policies that enable parents to take advantage of those? Let's start with Andrew.
Well, I could really get on my soapbox on this one, and I can also go real deep, so we'll try not to go too far in either vertical here. Let me say at a very high level, I hear everybody say we ought to trust kids and we ought to trust families, right? Everyone says if I'm going to create lifelong learners, I need to empower people. But then functionally, we don't give them any control of anything. And it would be like a parent who's like, I want you to drive, but I'm never giving you the keys to the car, right? I want you to learn how to cook, but don't touch my knives. It doesn't work. In our education system, if we actually trust people, we'll give them money and let them make the decisions that are best for them.
Exactly.
That will create a strong incentive system for a lot of the things we've talked about. And we don't do this with any other part of society, right? We don't take hospitals and say, people in this neighborhood can go to this hospital, but not that hospital, right? Instead, we say, you have money, you go wherever works best for you. We trust people to make the right decisions for their health care. We trust them to make the right decisions for the food they put in their bodies. You go through the litany of things, but for some reason in education, we've decided, nope, in our benevolence as a state, you live in this area and we're going to box you in and do that. But you get into even more immoral territory. You think about the history of the United States. We're having a very explicit conversation about race, a very long overdue conversation about it, which we should. For a long time in this country, we went through redlining, right? The federal government came in and said the federal government will not provide backing to mortgages that are in certain areas. And it should shock no one that the areas they picked out were largely African American and Hispanic areas. Well, when you draw school boundaries that are not dissimilar to those redlining districts and you say, I'm going to fund it using those same things, it shouldn't shock anybody that we end up in a two-tiered system of haves and have-nots. Well, great, we've moved the federal government out of that very brutal, very immoral approach to housing. There's still some remnants and things we need to get rid of, but we haven't changed the education system, and it sits in the same spot, which is how you end up with what you're saying. I can get two taxpayers that live hundreds of feet from each other having a totally different American experience. It's not even the same country, and it has so much to do with this. We should stop that. Like, it's just insane, right? Anybody in America today can use a whole range of public services. We can all use the county hospital. It doesn't matter where you live. We can all go watch PBS online. It doesn't matter where you live. Why in the world does it matter which education you go to? Let's free our value system. This is not about schools and bifurcating all. No, it's about kids and letting kids go to whatever works best for them. So trust them, give them the resources, and let them free. Let them grow and become who they're made to be.
Exactly.
Don?
Amen. Yes, well, I absolutely agree. You know, I once, when I was traveling the country trying to learn about education, I would ask people, what's the mission of a school? It's kind of a strange question, isn't it? What's the mission of a school? And people would look at me like I was somewhat strange. And they say, well, of course, the education of children. Everybody knows that. And I said, no. I said, the education of children is a goal, not a mission. Well, they'd look at me a little bit, and then I said, but anyhow, even if you were right, what's an educated child? Describe for me an educated child. Nobody could do that. We haven't changed graduation requirements in 117 years. What should a high school student know and be able to do? And should they all know the same thing and be able to do the same thing? Doesn't make any sense. So what you learn, and going back to your point, parents are the customer. Parents are the most important teacher of any child. Schools work for parents. And parents should have the right to choose the school that best fits their child. And so in my mind, going back to your point, give them the money, not cash, a voucher. Give them the money to pick the school they want to go, the education profile that they want to have. And I said the mission of a school is to serve as the primary partner with parents in the total development of their child into a responsible citizen. That's the mission of a school. We don't do that very well at all. We don't cater to parents, we don't develop children, and we certainly don't turn out responsible citizens. And until we will fail. And this country is on a downward track vis-a-vis our competition. And it's got to stop. And it can stop right here in Mississippi.
Well, and that seems to be the distinction between successful charter schools, successful district schools, successful private schools. It is how well do you take care of your customers, which are the parents.
Right.
And by association, the students. So Elyse, how do schools do that? The ones that do it well, how do they get it right? And how do we help other schools and districts make sure they're catering to their customers, the parents?
Well, I think it comes every single time back to what you have mentioned, which is that parents need a choice. We need to trust them in order to find what works best for their student. I was thinking about, as y'all were talking, about 3 big ways in which we've shown that we don't trust parents in Mississippi, even in programs that are designed to give them more options. I think about the Education Scholarship Account program, which came about here in 2015 and gives students with special needs the ability to go to the private school of their choice. This past year, the legislature rolled back some of the freedom in that program and took away the ability to go to school online, even during the pandemic, took away the option of going to certain private schools. That's a way that we're showing we don't trust parents to make the best decision for their children. I think of charter schools. It's wonderful that we have charter schools in Mississippi, and the number of them is slowly growing. However, and those are public schools of choice, if you don't know that. However, those schools can only open in specific districts. They can only open in failing districts. So we've left families who may be in C or B or A rated districts, but their students have fallen through the cracks. We've left them with very little choice about where they can go. I think of open enrollment, which is a public-to-public opportunity. Open enrollment allows you to choose a school that's different from the one you've been assigned to in your district, or it allows you to transfer out of your district to a different school. And in Mississippi, we actually have an open enrollment law, which is a great thing. We allow children of employees and children who live far away from the schools they're assigned to freedom to go to a different school. There's also an aspect of the law that allows students to transfer to a different district if the school boards of both their home school district and the receiving school district approve. And on the face of it, that might seem fair. They know what they're doing. But in reality, we've created a system where school boards can actually bar students from leaving their own district simply because they want to go to another district school in a district that is willing to take them. I know I've talked to families in the past couple of years who are distraught because their homeschool board is trying to roll back their ability to transfer to another district. They had previously allowed them to, and then they said, wait a second, we need that money in our school district. And this is, just so you know, only state dollars. They get to keep local and federal dollars in the homeschool district, even if the student leaves. They've made those decisions about money, not about students. I think of a school district that is scaling up a full-time virtual school and is ready to serve people that would serve best. But because of the open enrollment law, they're not sure that they can serve anyone outside of their district at all. So these are ways in which we've shown we don't trust parents far enough. And it all comes back to them being able, us seeing them as the best partners in education, the ones who know what they're doing, the ones who are closest to the problems that they see and feel most urgently, they're most invested and feel most urgently the need to address those issues. We should trust them more, and we should show that in the kinds of policies that we pass.
So Don, you were saying?
Well, I was just going to add one other thing to this, and we need to recognize that What we're talking about here is not only changing education, we're talking about changing culture. And the culture of the American society is based on and built around the school calendar and the school curriculum. And all of you need to have this sense of anger, because unless we as a society get angry about the way we are failing to educate our children, it's not going to change. Because we're all used to summers off, the Christmas break, the spring break. We have a travel and tourism industry that's built up all around the school calendar. So just think for a minute how much pushback we'll get if we start changing the school calendar. But if you take this 5-year-old child that I was talking about that grew up in this terrible environment, that child needs a longer day, a longer year, probably needs individualized attention to be successful. And that's going to change the culture. And so we as a society have to demand that our schools improve, or they won't. There's going to be big pushback.
So one of those culture-changing things is the pandemic.
Big time.
More so than any of us have seen in our lifetimes, we've seen the culture around education dramatically change and be disrupted. And for a lot of parents who took for granted that their neighborhood public school was going to provide a great education or an okay education, suddenly found themselves shopping around for the first time in their lives, looking into other options, desperate to find another educational setting because maybe their neighborhood public school wasn't open, or the virtual options were a patchwork, or was not well run. What are the biggest opportunities you guys see that are coming out of the pandemic, where parents will be more in the driver's seat, and we maybe what are the opportunities that change education for a generation because of this past year? Andrew?
I mean, I hope it changes. I think what COVID did was give people greater education about education, because they were forced to have to deal with it practically. But we've created a public education system. Like I said, it's an amalgamation of all these products and services: childcare, food services, math, science, athletics, all bundled together. And we've made it so easy for parents. It's an easy bake oven, right? You set it and forget it. So you drop your kid off at the door, wish them the best of luck. You'll see them when they come home. When folks were forced to have their kids come back into the house, I think one of the most common things we heard from people was like, wow, the actual academics don't take very long in a school day. Like, this is not as intense of an academic experience as we thought it was, which is fine, good, bad, or ugly. I think what it helped them realize, and what we see in our polling, is the thing that people really value in their educational experience is a relationship between their kid and a trusted adult. That's where the magic sauce happens, right? It's that relationship with your teacher that people are really going. In fact, we rarely see academics in the top 5 of things people value from educational experiences. So people really want that. I think some people obviously kept their kids at home. Some people started to innovate and do pods, or work with the neighbor down the street, or they came up with all sorts of very functional, very practical ways to do it. As COVID is now coming to an end, my fear, the reason I'm not all in on, like, we're going to change the world here, is the appeal of the easy bake oven is pretty substantial, right? Like, set it and forget it again. What I hope is that people have seen that as their kids have had the freedom to learn whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted to learn, that they have a lot of very diverse interests. And when we've talked here about choice in the accountability context, I think many of you probably thinking, like, I need to get kid out of this school into that school. I think we've got to take the ideas of choice and freedom and drive them way deeper than that. Most people don't want to leave public schools. Most people don't want to leave their public schools. But they do want to be able to learn French or Chinese, like I was talking about earlier. It's ludicrous to think that you'd have to leave your public school to be able to do that, right? You could stay where you are, and you could have an experience with a French tutor. You could use Rosetta Stone. There's a whole world of ways to learn French. We ought to be able to focus on what that is. Whether that means you stay in the public school or it leaves the public school, we shouldn't care. right? The focus should just be intensely on the individual kid and what's right for them. I think that COVID has given people enough education about the nuances of the products and services that are bundled together to think through, what could I do with math differently? What could I do with foreign language differently? What can I do with athletics differently? And maybe be a little more aggressive if we're there. And I hope that is the direction we go, because it's the right moral thing to do for our kids, rather than just drop them off and wish them the best of luck.
Mm-hmm. Don?
I think this COVID, Churchill's comment, never let a good crisis go to waste, makes all kinds of sense. It's been a crisis. But what we should expect is that the people who could least afford to lose the year of education are the ones who got hurt the most. And the achievement gap is going to be exacerbated by COVID. Your kid and my kid, maybe we have two children and we each have their own bedroom, they each have their own computer. We're college educated, and they did just fine. They were online and they could take any course they wanted. But let's suppose you're the third child in a house of 5 children with a single mom and 2 bedrooms and no computers and no internet. And you've gone 18 months without school. That's a disaster. And that's irretrievable unless we do things differently. And unfortunately, in this state, we have lots of people in that latter category. And so, going back to the notion of the parent, I think our schools in certain areas are going to have to stay open longer, and they're going to have to cater to parents, and they're going to have to create computer labs, and there's going to have to be learning going on many hours a day, well beyond the normal formal classroom. We have to catch these kids up. We have to do something to make sure they don't lose a year and a half of education. It's irretrievable if we don't address it, and we'll pay a price down the road.
I think one thing that the pandemic made very apparent was that states have invested in virtual education at varying levels. And Mississippi was pretty far behind other states. I think of Florida, who was able to immediately use their full-time virtual school and enroll hundreds and thousands of students into that school as soon as the pandemic hit and schools closed down. We didn't have that option. And it's something that we should really take seriously now, not just because virtual education can be an emergency preparedness measure, but because in a rural state, it provides all sorts of opportunities, like Andrea was talking about, to courses that maybe you can't get in your rural high school. It also offers an opportunity for a full-time virtual education, and I'm not talking about the emergency remote learning that people were not too happy with during the pandemic, but a full-time virtual platform focused on providing online instruction to students who've chosen to be there by teachers who are trained to be there as well. There's an opportunity there for Mississippi. We actually have a Mississippi Virtual Public School. The legislature saw the need to put that in place back in 2006. But since then, it's served very few students, and there are a number of reasons for that. Now's the time to expand it, because in a rural state, you can offer so much more opportunity through a virtual education, whether that's through courses or a full-time virtual school. It can also serve students who learn at a different pace, whether that's faster or slower from their regular classroom. It can serve students who are homebound or who have special needs, and so many more. So it's something that we should take seriously in the wake of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. So in our final couple of minutes, one question, we'll do kind of short answers, and then we'll conclude. As you look at Mississippi and this moment of where we are, what's one thing you would ask our legislature to do, our citizens to rise up and ask for? What's the one thing we could do that would make the biggest impact in our schools going into the next decade?
So you've got the federal government handing out money like it's candy and never going out of season. Take that money and give it directly to families. And you don't need to ask them to leave their public schools. You don't need to ask them to do anything. Just give them a set of money. Idaho gave everybody $1,500. Texas gave folks $500. Pick the dollar amount. You can make the math run out. But give it directly to them and let them do what's right for them. Trust your students and watch what happens. You'll find a special kind of magic that I think you'll want to build upon, and you can do it without having to harm anybody or pick any fights. Do it tomorrow. The one piece of advice I'll give you, though, if you decide to go down that path, is Too many legislators want to do things just for one set of kids. They want to do a program just for low income or just for special needs. Like, folks, we already have a two-tiered education system. It's not getting better anytime soon. If you keep making programs that are built for one class of people or another, you're going to keep having a two-tiered system. Have a program that everybody benefits from, that everybody has even weight in, and make that program about trust in people. You do that, you make it for everybody, you give everyone money, and you let them run loose. I think you'll be amazed at what Mississippians are capable of.
Donald?
Well, I'm sorry, but I can't give you one key.
I had a suspicion you might not
Yeah.
be able to.
I would do 4 things. I would, first of all, pass legislation to open up the opportunity for innovation in all districts without constraint to the existing system. Then I'd change the way we select and train teachers. Then I'd change the way we select and train leaders. And then if I were governor of this state, I would initiate a campaign to inform the public to get angry. I would point out to every citizen in the state how terrible we're doing and how we have to change and get people angry, because nothing's going to happen until the population decides it has to happen. Politicians work for you, whether you think it or not, and you got to get angry. The outrage is not present anywhere in the United States, and until it is, nothing's going to materially happen. But we have to have better teachers, better leaders, we have to open up innovation, and we have to get angry.
Elyse?
I'm not going to say too much different. Those were great. I think just kind of the overarching theme for me and in some of the recommendations that y'all gave is that we take a deeper look at the things that we've tried to do and say, have we too tightly regulated this program? Have we too tightly regulated this thing that we tried to do? Let's roll some of those things back and see how people use that freedom. And then let's use those insights to pass better policies than we did. I think the biggest danger facing us right now is that because of incremental progress here and there, we sit back and say the status quo is fine. It's clearly not. Mississippians don't feel that it is, and so we should be thinking outside of the box in order to change education for the better and create brighter futures for Mississippians.
Please help me thank our panelists.